First things first is getting into a fighting game. Chances are, if you're watching this, you've already decided that you at least want to put some effort into learning and researching how to improve at a fighting game, specifically this fighting game, but these principles should apply to most other fighting games too. But on the off chance that you're not already a bit into fighting games, I feel the need to start there because I've introduced a lot of people, a lot of friends, family, and acquaintances into this genre, and this, as I've found, is by far and away the biggest hurdle to people learning. They don't get the appeal in the first place. So, if you don't need to hear this part, at the very least, be a dear and share this segment around to people not already in the know. Have you ever tried to take someone who isn't already into fighting games and get them to spend even a few minutes hitting buttons or looking at a screen before they go back to their phones? 95% of fighting game players die off within the first 20 minutes of playing. There are other videos that discuss why this might be and why people should play fighting games at all, like the one nice one from Cosmonaut Variety Hour. I'll link that above, but those videos generally all suck shit, and I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you the truth. As for the appeal of fighting games, we have to take a step back and examine the psychology of game design. Many of you might have heard the famous study that categorizes gamers into 4 distinct camps: killers, explorers, completionists, and the narrative one. I forget what they're called. But basically, a person can be motivated to play a game either through a sense of competition with other people, in which they enjoy the clashing of egos, perhaps. They might enjoy exploration and discovery, like finding cool shit in a big open world or solving puzzles. They could enjoy accomplishing things and seeing the growth of their own achievements and or skills and or knowledge or something. Or they enjoy getting invested in narratives and like interacting with communities and such. All of these appeals exist within fighting games. Cosmonaut Variety Hour, Marcus, in his video on why you should play fighting games, he speaks very plainly on how he was brought into the fighting game fold through the excitement and magic of watching a tournament. He even says that it reminded him of watching anime, and this is precisely on point. A competition is often a narrative for the spectators. People who like the narrative community element should be introduced to fighting games through watching a good tournament or some other running storyline in real life. Most fighting games have really shitty plots themselves, so it's hard to convince a narrative-minded person to play fighting games for the sake of the characters or story. Although people may get into fighting games just because they think the designs are kind of cool. That also counts within this category. I wouldn't show those kinds of people just random famous hype clips or sets from tournaments. I would make sure to show them an actual story arc, like a full top 8, or anything to give them context into the players and their journeys and why they, as a viewer, should give a fuck about the medium that created this. This by itself is more than enough to get some people to at least learn a fighting game well enough to better understand the stories that they're watching unfold. Through better understanding of the game mechanics, or the community memes, or how certain characters and players are perceived and why. A killer might seem like the easiest person to hook into fighting games, but that's not actually the case, as I've found. The easiest hook is the completionist type. See, a killer wants to compete and, beat people and win and all that stuff. But when you start a fighting game, you lose. And 2, it's very natural for people to front-load you with a lot of technical information that, to be fair, you often need before you'll perform very well. Killers usually don't want to put that much effort into learning how to play something before they start trying to play it. You know, you'll tell that someone is a killer when they just want to hop into matches and run with it. If you tell them oh, no, and force them to go to training mode and learn all the basic rules and skills and stuff, that'll usually turn them off from wanting to play. Depending on how well they deal with losses in their competitive pursuits, stomping them into the dirt in immediate matches probably also won't make them want to play anymore. So they're kind of a difficult tightrope to balance on. Personally, I'd probably try to treat them to some combination of the other appeals, like show them a emotional hype match between top players to instill them the idea that it's a satisfying to play and beat a great match with a great opponent. For killers, it's best if they're in the presence of like friends or peers that are equally unskilled, so they can have a feeling of relatively fair competition. But even then, they'll probably fumble with the controls, not feel great about the game, have a bit of fun with it, then put it aside. To get them to become FGC people, they need to be shown that there's more that they might be missing out on. If you're dealing with a completionist, you get to breathe a sigh of fresh air, a little bit of relief. If the completionist person, if they don't already like fighting games, all it takes is adjusting their mental image of fighting games. See, that's the thing. Most people have a perception of fighting games that's not necessarily accurate to the lived experience of a fighting game player. You know, a lot of completionists, myself included, I would put myself in this category, don't really like competition that much. It's anxiety-inducing and stressful and whatever. You just need to get them to see that fighting games are much more about one's own progress than about two different people seeing who's better than each other. In fact, you can look at pretty much all competition in fighting games as just a means of providing a constant and ever-evolving hurdle for the individual players to constantly improve themselves against, rather than any sort of measure of pride or ego. I mean, that's what competition is. A single match, single set, single tournament, single year, none of these things really matter. They don't decide who's the coolest, toughest, most raddest dude on the face of the planet for all time. They're just good fun. They just produce a winner at the time, and they give people the chance to beat their past selves, rather than beat anyone else. Anyone who likes Dark Souls should be able to like fighting games. The feeling is basically identical if you just frame it in that way. All you need to do is give them clearly defined and clearly attainable goals, like execute this combo 5 times in a row, or punish this move on block when it happens consistently, and you'll create very visible cases of completion, learning specific knowledge that wasn't known before, acquiring specific skills that weren't there before. After that, it's just a matter of getting them to not be anxious about playing against real people, and they can take those same concepts to matches. I was executing Touch of Death combos in Persona Ultimax before I played a single round online against another human, because I was a super intense perfectionist, completionist type. I just wanted to optimize the game, and I'm so anxious about the concept of competition, I didn't really want to play it against anyone else. I had only developed offline skills while I was still severely lacking in real match skills against real humans, so I got my ass beat like everyone else. But the point is, I could play the game a whole lot, understand it a lot, see tournaments of it, and get highly skilled at some aspects of it purely through single-player completionism. However, the games themselves sometimes struggle to pull this off due to really bad and limited single-player content, bad CPU AIs that don't even remotely mimic what a real match is going to feel like or look like, and just, it doesn't help to develop offline skills without you specifically knowing which skills need to be developed and how to develop them. So understanding how to set those clear and attainable goals can require some input from more experienced players, which is kind of the point of this video series. And lastly, we have the explorers. In fighting games, there is always more to learn and discover. Newcomers might have an idea that the people playing at the top level know absolutely everything there is to know about a game, and it's true that they know a lot, way more than you do, but the meta is always changing. Am I saying you can pick up a fighting game and suddenly discover something earth-shattering and meta-evolving that none of the far more experienced and dedicated players haven't already found? No, but you could find stuff that you haven't found yet, like any single-player explorer-based game. Getting into fighting games is much easier with a community of peers who are equally new and equally bad at the game, more or less. I highly recommend getting your actual friends into fighting games, if you can, be a fucking miracle worker like that. It's quite difficult to do in my experience. But finding Discord groups online and online communities can also suffice. Just nowhere near as well as getting close friends along for the ride. When you're a relative member of a group, you're constantly discovering things for the benefit of that group. No guide in existence is going to tell you every single granular piece of information that might be useful to know about. That's impossible. Fighting games are extremely situational. You'll eventually learn that immediately after blocking this specific block string at this specific range, created from this knockdown, if your opponent presses this button, how will your buttons and their hitbox-hurtbox interactions play out? This is the Autistic Guide, but even I can't document every single worthwhile observation there is to make in this fighting game. There'll be a lot of exploration and a lot of discovery on your part. Some players will lean more into that than others based on their motivations and their taste. I'm not a very talented player, but I'm very autistic about testing, and thinking outside the box. And I've discovered quite a few valuable pieces of information most players didn't know about. I've had pro players like Justin Wong, The Cool Kid, Arturo Sanchez, and Dominion all tell me that they've used my ideas and my discoveries in matches. To get an explorer into fighting games is a little awkward because you can't just tell them things. You have to get them to realize how they can test situations and find new ideas on their own. You have to teach them how to lab, and you have to get them to the point where they know enough that they know when they've discovered something new. So that'll be early on in my video series here. And there you have it. It's all about how you frame it. But anyone can find their way to at least get into the idea of fighting games and mess around with them, and the community enough to, have a good time with it. So, what is the Autistic Guide? What am I doing here? Well, basically, like I said, I've been not particularly satisfied by the beginner to intermediate whatever guides that I've seen floating around the interwebs. I think a lot of strong players just naturally develop certain strengths that they no longer fall into the trappings of weaker players. If you listen to the sort of advice people give most players on how to get stronger, 9 times out of 10, that advice will not make you stronger. Even if you grind and try your best to implement those exact ideas they talk about, it's not the most helpful because there are so many complex aspects to your performance as a player that it can't be boiled down to simply applying these ideas. For instance, I watched CeeLo's guide to how to get from like rookie to diamond overall with Sakura and what to implement for each rank as a new player. He tells you what he's going to do each rank and then he implements those things that he says he's going to. But it's extremely misleading to think that another player could just do what he's doing and play at that particular level, because he already has a boatload of skills under his belt that he can't just undo. He has his developed mental acuity during matches. His mind runs extremely efficiently while he's playing. He has a great recognition of each situation immediately. He has innate knowledge of how to deconstruct gimmicks his opponent might play against him. His confidence in his playstyle. He has the ability to play his game plan and have faith that it will function and not be undone by an awkward style from the opponent. Even just every little micro read or micro decision on basic movement, or when he expects and looks for jumps. These are all vital skills that a beginner can't just replicate because they haven't developed all of those complex skills. The Autistic Guide is a guide that an autistic person such as myself would prefer to have. A guide that provides concrete ideas and concepts and looks at every situation from a bird's eye perspective to identify any place where a player might need some other sort of advice in order to make use of all these skills that they want to master.